On behalf of the Veterans Monument Committee of Troy, welcome to this year's celebration of Veterans Day. My name is Joseph J. Malla, and I am the chairman of the committee. Would you please stand for the invocation and remain standing for the flag raising and national anthem and Pledge of Allegiance. Today, we gather to honor those who have served our country so that we may stand here and still live in freedom. It is right to be constantly reminded of our gift of freedom and of those who gave their last full measure of devotion to ensure that freedom. Remembering those who have is only half the task before us today. Our children must be taught who they were, what they did, and why they did it. To do anything less would be a disservice to their sacrifice and their memories. Those who have gone before us created a clear path to follow. We must never waver from that path of freedom and democracy. Take their dreams and go forward, shouldering the cause of freedom. Carry it high and with pride. Amen. Color guard, post the colors. Mayor McGinnis.
you could remain standing and face the flag for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be seated. Firstly, I'd like to again thank you for your attendance here today. And I'd like to introduce some of the dignitaries that we have among us. Of course, you just met Mayor Maureen McGinnis, Councilman Jim Campbell, Councilman Wade Fleming, Councilman Dane Slater, former Mayor Gene Stein, former Councilwoman Robin Beltramini, and last but not least, our most rigorous attendee to this program, former Councilman Tony Pallotta. During these times, while the United States is engaged in a war, it is only right to give our thanks to any soldier, sailor, Marine, or airman if you can identify that person as a veteran. Give him or her your thanks and gratitude for a job well done, and let him know that you appreciate their sacrifice. It is a small gesture, but it is the right thing to do. The week before last, I took my wife and daughter to their respective doctor's appointments. Afterwards, while we were in the elevator, waiting for the doors to close, an elderly man waved and asked to hold the elevator. So I stuck my arm out and held the door, and he came in. When he came in, I noticed he had Navy veteran on his jacket. Being a Navy veteran myself, I would never miss an opportunity to swap a few sea stories. I started by saying, I see you're in the Navy. You were in the Navy. I retired from the Navy myself. He replied, are you World War II? I replied, no, Vietnam was my era. He came back with, I served during World War II, and I served on the USS Indianapolis. And we carried the A-bomb over to Japan, over to bomb Japan. Knowing a little about what happened to the Indianapolis, I let him do the talking. He stated to me that he still suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, and that was for the past 67 years since he last served. But then he said, I do a lot of speaking to groups, veterans groups, organizations, clubs, as a way of helping myself. I mentioned that the Troy Veterans Monument Committee hosted Memorial and Veterans Day ceremonies every year, and that he sounded like a good candidate to speak. He handed me his business card. I shook his hand and thanked him for his service, and we both went our separate ways. I mentioned that I knew what happened to the Indianapolis, but did I really know the complete story, I went to the internet and did a little research. The Indianapolis, a heavy cruiser, delivered the first operational atomic bomb to the island of Tinian on July 26, 1945. Tinian is an island in the Marianas and was a base for the B-29 bombers. The Indianapolis then reported to the Commander-in-Chief Pacific for orders. She was directed to join the battleship Idaho at Leyte Gulf in the Philippines and prepare for the invasion of Japan. While sailing to Leyte at 14 minutes past midnight, July 30th, 1945, she was hit by 2 torpedoes of 6 that were fired by the I-58, a Japanese submarine. Of the 1,196 men aboard that ship, about 900 made it into the water within the 12 minutes before she sank. A very few life rafts were released. Most survivors wore the standard Kapok life jacket and tried to find other survivors, and then gather in small groups. The shark attacks began with sunrise of the first day and continued until the men were physically removed from the water almost 5 days later. On the 4th day, a Navy pilot on routine anti-submarine patrol accidentally spotted many men in the water. The pilot reported the event, and a Navy PBY seaplane was dispatched. On the way to the scene, the PBY overflew the destroyer U.S. Cecil Doyle. The Doyle then diverted to the scene. The PBY arrived hours before the Doyle, and ignoring standing orders not to land at sea, landed and started to pick up survivors. When the plane was filled, they lashed survivors to the wings of the plane. They rescued 56 men that day. The Doyle then arrived in total darkness. The captain of the ship pointed his largest searchlight into the sky as a beacon for other vessels, disregarding the safety of his own ship and crew. Of the 900 who made it into the water, only 317 were rescued. Among them was John Heller, Seaman Second Class, the man who I talked to in the elevator. After almost 5 days of constant shark attacks, starvation, terrible thirst, suffering, and exposure and their wounds, the men of the Indianapolis were rescued from the sea. For security reasons and the bombing of Japan and the surrender, a public announcement of the Indianapolis was withheld so that news of the end of the war would not be overshadowed. This was history that I might have missed had I not said, "I see you're a Navy veteran." I retired from the Navy myself. If you encounter a serviceman or woman or a veteran, engage him or her, welcome them home, and thank them for their service. You'll never know what you can learn. At this time, I'd like to invite Captain Mike Kerr to the microphone, to the podium here, for a little special presentation.
My name's Mike Kerr. I've been a Troy resident for over 40 years, and haven't missed one of these yet. And I wouldn't. November 11th had a special meeting for me when I was in Vietnam. I was a platoon leader. And you all heard about and saw the news reports of Tet of 1968. Well, I was in country in 1968, and just prior to Tet in 1969, Company D, 1st Battalion, 35th Infantry was assigned search and destroy as well as observational responsibilities along Highway 19, which was in direct line with the Ho Chi Minh Trail and Pleiku City, which we considered a viable target for Tet of 69. What happened up there was that we did ambushes and we sent out 4-man patrols, observation, long-range reconnaissance patrols, and likely infiltration routes in an attempt to intercept the North Vietnamese as they were making their way east. On this day, 11/11 of 1968, 3 men in my platoon were killed returning from one of these long-range reconnaissance patrols. Gary Rust from Southbridge, Massachusetts, was 21 years of age. He enlisted in the Army. One of the neatest things I think I ever saw is he came to the platoon in August and got his first pay voucher. In Vietnam, what would happen is guys wouldn't get pay for the most part. Some guys would get $10 or $15 cash, so that if we went to near a fire base or back to the division headquarters, they could buy things. Well, Gary wouldn't get a dime. Gary was from a family of 9. He had 8, 4 brothers and 4 sisters, and he got his first pay voucher. The pay vouchers would come out to the field. The platoon leader would hand them out to the men within his platoon, and he got his first combat pay increase, which was, I think, $55. And I thought he'd won the lottery. He was the happiest guy on the planet. Gary Rust loved to play cards, bid whist, poker, but never, ever could the guys in the platoon get him to play cards with money. He'd play cards for cigarettes because he didn't smoke, or matches, but never, ever play cards for money, because money to him and his family were far too great an asset to waste on playing cards. Jim Humphrey was the second man killed. Jim Humphrey was from Shawnee Mission, Kansas. Jim Humphrey was also 21 years of age. Although he'd been accepted to Kansas University, he refused to take a college exemption. He got drafted. He went. Shawnee Mission, Kansas, in the heartland. Jim Humphrey looked like a middle linebacker. He was a farm boy, and I attempted to make him a squad leader. He would always carry, he had a couple guys in his platoon. One, Ross Steen, kind of slight build. He would always carry Ross Steen's machine gun ammunition when we were going on a hump. He always carried 4 extra canteens of water. Water was heavy, and you carried enough for yourself, but he carried 4 extra canteens. We had a guy in his squad, Shorty Blakemore, that was a little bit on the hefty side and went through water like it went through a sieve. And whenever Shorty ran out of water, he'd go to Jim Humphrey, and Jim would always have water for him. I tried to make Jim a sergeant. Stripes came down, and I said, Jim, I'd really like you to be the platoon or squad leader for your squad. I'd like to promote you to sergeant. He says, no, sir, I can't accept that. He says, Harold Montgomery, the guy in his platoon, young African-American soldier, had a wife and a child. He said, I'll run the platoon, give the stripes to Harold, so Harold can send that money home to his family. Jim ran the squad, Harold got the stripes, and Harold got the money. That's kind of man Jim Humphrey was. The last guy I'd like to talk about was John Bratton. John Bratton was from West Monroe, Louisiana. The guys called him Preacher. I didn't, out in the Badlands, you didn't know what day of the week it was. You were just worried about getting through today and what was to come tomorrow. Preacher wanted to be an ordained minister. Preacher was 23 years of age. And the thing that bothered me most about Preacher is every time that we went on an operation, the platoon leader had to inspect these guys. John Bratton would never carry a round in the chamber of his rifle. He said it would not be fitting for him to take another man's life and want to be an ordained minister. So I'd say, Preacher, charge your weapon and let's get ready to go. And what he did after that, I don't know. I don't want to know. But Preacher, on every Sunday, Preacher knew when Sunday was. Preacher would come up, say, Lieutenant, is it okay if I have a little prayer session? I would say certainly. And the guys within the platoon, or if we were in a company area, Preacher would go around to each squad. Hey, we're going to have services at 10 o'clock. And Preacher would get out his Bible. He was never too far from his Bible, and give a little service of his own. I was in country 12 months. I think I saw the battalion chaplain twice. Preacher served that duty well for those people that needed Preacher there for him. If you ever go on the 1st 35th Infantry website, look up Preacher. When Preacher and the other members of the reconnaissance unit were ambushed, you'll notice the Preacher got a Bronze Star with Valor because of what he did. So I'm here today and ask that you say a silent prayer for Rusty, Hump, and Preacher. 21 years of age. What does a 21-year-old kid know about life? I've been fortunate to experience many things, but combat veterans understand that everything that we are able to enjoy is enjoyed bittersweet, because these young men and fine soldiers never had an opportunity to do that. Thank you very much for coming today. It means a lot to me, and it means a lot to veterans of foreign wars to show that you have not forgotten those that have given their lives for the service of their country. Thank you very much.
So there's a story where Mike Kerr, November 11th will always be a reminder to the 3 men that he lost on that very day. For myself, July 26th is my wedding anniversary. And by the grace of God, my wife and I will be celebrating our 55th this coming July. And I will keep the Indianapolis in my memory. At this time, the Troy Heritage Concert Band will play our Armed Forces Salute. When you hear your song of your service, stand up to be recognized and give a little salute. Army. United States Marine Corps. United States Navy. United States Air Force. Coast Guard. It is now my honor to introduce our guest speaker for today's program. Nancy A. Sussick is a Senior Vice President of Beaumont Health System who serves as President of Beaumont Hospital, Troy. She oversees the operations of the 406-bed Troy Hospital and its ambulatory, diagnostic, and surgery centers. Prior to her appointment as president in April 2012, she was vice president and chief operating officer and chief nursing officer at Beaumont Troy, responsible for operations and nursing practice. She chaired the hospital's Magnet Committee and Nurse Executive Leadership Council and numerous operation councils. Under her leadership, Beaumont Troy achieved Magnet designation, the highest recognition for nursing excellence. Nancy has been a registered nurse since 1986 and has held various staff, nursing, leadership, and administrative positions at Beaumont Hospital, Royal Oak, since 1986. She recently retired from the United States Naval Reserve, holding the rank of captain after 24 years of service. Nancy earned a Master of Science degree in nursing from Oakland University and a Bachelor of Science degree in nursing from Mercy College, Detroit. She serves as the chair of the Oakland University School of Nursing Advisory Board. She is also active as a volunteer in the Troy and Avondale school system, serving as mentor for high school students. She is a member of the Michigan Organization of Nurse Executives, the American College of Healthcare Executives, and the Naval Reserve Association. Lastly, Nancy was the recipient of what I call the prestigious award, the Spirit of America Award for 2010, presented to her by the Veterans Monument Committee of Troy. I'd like to now invite her up to the podium.
Good morning. On behalf of myself and the military personnel and veterans that are here today, thank you for taking the time to hear and recognize our service and share our stories. As you can see, we have many and many more to be told. On November 11th each year, the nation pauses to recognize and honor America's veterans and celebrate their contributions to our way of life. You may ask, what is the history of this date? In our American history, World War I, which was known as the Great War, involved 35 countries, and on the 11th day of the 11th month, at the 11th hour, November 11th, 1918, an armistice agreement went into effect between Allied nations and Germany, which at the time was generally known as the war to end all wars, which we certainly know today was not true. In November 1919, President Wilson proclaimed November 11th as Armistice Day. Armistice meaning an agreement between opposing armies to suspend hostilities in order to discuss peace terms, in other words, a truce. In November of 1938, the 11th of November was declared a legal holiday, a day to be dedicated to world peace and to celebrate and honor veterans for the choices they made to serve our country. In 1954, after World War II had required the greatest mobilization of soldiers, Marines, and airmen in the nation's history, and after American forces had fought aggression in Korea, the 83rd Congress amended the Act of 1938 and inserted the word veterans in place of armistice. November 11th became a day to honor American veterans of all wars. And as we know, there were many other wars since in which many servicemen and women lost their lives in preserving our freedom of this great nation. Generation after generation, veterans protected, defended, and preserved the principles and ideals that define our democracy. Over 22 million living veterans today embody our exceptional character and value as people, each a line in our nation's history, but together many chapters towards today's future. Every veteran lives by a strict code of discipline and understands the meaning of personal accountability, loyalty, sacrifice, and pride. From the moment the military oath was taken to the day of honorable discharge, a veteran's time belonged to America and their country. Their country came first. They shared in the responsibility of maintaining the finest fighting force in the world. Our veterans are not just part of history. There are millions among us today, all fighting to keep America a free democracy. There were those who also help us in time of national disaster, such as Hurricane Katrina, or most recently with the devastation from Hurricane Sandy on the East Coast. Our military was there for us. Over the past 24 years of my military career, I've had the privilege of providing care to many military personnel. Each of them had tremendous stories to tell. When I looked into their eyes, I was truly amazed at the strength and courage of these men and women. They are so dedicated, and their goal is to get back to their fellow soldiers in the field and to continue to fight for our freedom. The stories they tell are so fresh and vivid that they feel like they occurred yesterday. Speaking of stories, I have a few to tell of my own. Recently, I had the opportunity to visit with a very ill patient at Beaumont Hospital, Troy. Anytime I have a veteran, or I know that there's a veteran in the hospital, I love to go up and give them a visit. This veteran had served in World War II. He shared his stories with me and told me that he had been in 19 countries. I asked, well, which one did you like the best? I'd given him one of my military retirement coins, and as he clutched my military retirement coin, he said, "The good old USA, and I will hold this coin forever." Shortly after, he quietly passed away. I will definitely remember those precious moments with him forever. I've also had the opportunity to listen to the story of a veteran who had spent time in Vietnam. This is Lieutenant Joseph Mala, I think who we all know. My daughter, Hannah, is a high school student, and she interviewed Lieutenant Mala for a class project as they were studying the Vietnam War. As he told his story, you would have thought he had just gone through the experience. His memories were so vivid and descriptive. He recalled the sounds of blast and aircraft flying overhead, the sleepless, watchful, waiting nights, the smells of death, the sights of destruction. His thought was, will this ever end? He remembers being frightened, but not for himself, but for his family, who may lose a husband and a father. He knew he was fighting to keep the family and the country he loved so dearly free. As he continued the story, he began to choke up as he remembered many of his fellow soldiers who lost their lives. I spoke to him a few days after his discussion with my daughter to thank him for helping her. He told me that it also helped him by telling his story. My daughter learned a lot, and she said, because, Mom, I've read a lot about Vietnam, but it seems so unreal. However, by speaking with Lieutenant Mala, it made it real, and I have a better understanding of what our soldiers and sailors experienced. I'm the president of Beaumont Troy, as you had heard earlier, and on Friday, I had the opportunity to recognize members of our Beaumont Troy family during our annual Veterans Day ceremony. I think many times there's many soldiers and sailors and veterans walking beside us that we don't even realize. There are many at Beaumont Troy and certainly in our Troy community. One of them is Major Christopher Blomberg. He's a nurse in heart and vascular services who received a prestigious medal for his role in saving the life of an injured sailor during air transport to a medical facility. John Roberts, a nuclear medicine technician who proudly served our country. And I also had the opportunity to hear some more stories from some of our volunteers. We have many volunteers at the Troy Hospital that have done many, many years of service to the military. 6 of them helped us lead the Pledge of Allegiance on Friday. Those were 2 World War II veterans, Tom Murphy and Mac McKeedon, Vietnam veterans George Kolf, Doug Massini, Richard Pulowski, and Tom Gamlin. And I know we have many, many more that are volunteers, and I really appreciate their service and all the service that they've chosen to give back to our community and to our hospital. Their hair may have grayed, and their steps may be a little bit slower, but the spirit and the pride in their eyes for our country radiantly shines through. Beaumont Troy is proud of our heroes in our hallways. We are also proud of those heroes in our hearts. Over the past year, we have lost 2 of our 2 family members from Beaumont Troy, actually. One of them was Todd Lampka, and the other gentleman was, Todd was actually the son-in-law of one of our staff members. The other one, on November 30th, just 19 days after we gathered for our last Veterans Day, one of our staff social workers, Andrea Rowe, learned of the death of her brother, Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, Vincent Bell. Vincent was 28 years old and serving in Afghanistan. It was his 5th deployment to the Middle East. The first 4 were in Iraq. Vincent loved his country and accepted the risk that his allegiance Vincent and Todd, heroes, along with many others, are all in our hearts here today. We also must remember and recognize the families whose loved ones are serving our country or have lost their lives for our freedom, who have made many sacrifices and endure endless days and nights of worry. But they are so proud. I encourage you to listen to the stories of our veterans. Encourage your children to listen. We must never forget what our veterans experienced and sacrificed for our freedom. Take the time to thank a veteran for the service they provided to protect our freedom. To the veterans and military personnel here today, you have truly stood the watch and protected our country. I stand with you. I sincerely thank each of you for your dedication and commitment to our country and our freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain. Very inspiring. Color Guard, post for the wreath laying. seated. I invited the gentleman in the red shirt to come up and help us lay the wreath because his son was killed aboard the Stark, USS Stark, during the Iraq War. Killed with a Chinese Silkworm missile. And I thought it was only right and proper for us to pay our respects to your son. And thank you for his service. Will you please stand for the benediction? There is no greater love than this, to lay down one's life for his friends. This is the reason we are here today, to give tribute, respect, remembrance, and honor to the gallant men and women who obtained God's glory by laying down their lives for us and others who called for their help. For they carried themselves as soldiers, and they did it with God's grace. May God bless their very souls and protect those soldiers who stand in harm's way, and grant us peace for God and country. May God bless America. And thank you for your attendance. It was nice to have you here. Thank you.